Yes, Your Honor.
Close your eyes.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Jordan Ryder was pushed to the edge and her daughter took the fall. While on a camping trip with her mother, 12-year-old Parker Page was pushed off a cliff to where she fell to her death. Parker suffered from osteogenesis imperfecta, which is also commonly known as brittle bone disease. This disease causes her to be underweight and undersized for her age and shorter than a typical 12-year-old. Brittle bone disease can also cause inconsistent bruising along with difficulty breathing. On July 14, 2018, the defendant took Parker Page from her legal guardian, Corbin Dallas, without his consent. He also proceeded to take Parker to Calkins Campground. Upon arriving at Calkins, the defendant interacted with Armani Rodriguez, where she refused to show her ID or sign a waiver. And then eventually she did comply and she rented campsite 12, which is the most dangerous campsite available, and went against Armani's recommendation. The defendant then took Parker to the Crone Loop for a hike, where there is a sign at the beginning of the trail that openly states that small children, which Parker fits that description, should not use this trail. It also states that on this mountain, that this mountain has resulted in serious injuries and death. Knowing this, the defendant still took her daughter on the most complex and dangerous trail available. She was just so angry at the burden that Parker had placed on her life, so tired of the constant complaining, that she was pushed to the edge. It was on this hiking trip to the Crone Route where the defendant pushed her daughter over the edge. The defendant did not even think to call the authorities about her missing daughter. Instead, she was worried about being arrested for her violation of her parole. The defendant cared more about not violating her parole than going back and finding her own missing daughter. On the morning of July 15, 2018, the defendant was awoken by Detective Chesney, who questioned them about Parker's location and then continued to arrest them for being in violation of her parole. Shortly after the arrest was made, Parker's body was found at the bottom of a cliff, in which she had been pushed over. The defendant was almost immediately charged for this crime. Midland's law requires the prosecution to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the accused crime. The prosecution has accepted that we carry this burden. In this case, the accused crime is aggravated murder. This charge means that somebody knowingly caused the death of someone else. The word knowingly is defined as understanding that a person's conduct has certain effects or that the conduct will almost certainly cause a particular result. In this case, the defendant did conduct an action, pushing Parker Page, that would have caused a particular result, which resulted in her death. From the prosecution, you have heard from three witnesses: Cameron Lee, Detective Chesney, and Dr. Quincy. First, you heard the statements of Cameron Lee. Cameron Lee testified that on several occasions, she noticed Jordan and Parker constantly arguing and fighting. She also saw Parker limping and walking on the dangerous Lacrone Loop being led by Jordan Ryder. Later that day, Cameron saw Jordan return from that trail, but she did not see Parker. In fact, she never saw Parker Page ever again. Detective Chesney testified that he had to arrest Jordan for a possible parole violation. During the standard pat-down, he came across a napkin in Ryder's pocket and then bagged it for evidence. On this napkin, you can find excuses that he wrote such things as, "I didn't mean to do it, and I was just so angry." When finally he settled on missing, should he tell his PO, Kai Washington? Both of those were crossed out. Chesney also found the hiking staff in Ryder's tent that Dr. Quincy recognized as having the same measurements as the bruising found on Parker Page's body. Detective Chesney also conducted an interrogation with Jordan Ryder. During this, Jordan went on a tangent about increasing a life insurance policy from $10,000 to $200,000. These numbers also correlate to some of the numbers written on this napkin where it was found. Dr. Quincy testified to the facts of Parker Page's death. Using scientifically relied upon formulas in her field, she calculated Parker's time of death to be between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock p.m. on July 14, 2018. She also found that the ecmosis found on Parker's body measured the exact same as the end of the capped hiking staff, which is 2.25 centimeters by 1.125 centimeters. The post-mortem injuries that the subject's body suffered was not from an accidental force. No, it was from blunt force trauma, specifically to the head. In her professional opinion, she can rule out natural or environmental factors for her death. Parker Page's death was a homicide. Even Dr. Lopez believed that the conclusion was plausible, and that the Dr. Quincy's conclusions were the most likely correct. Your Honor, what the defense is going to tell you is simply not true. Throughout their closing statement, the state would like to ask you to keep the facts of the case in mind. Parker's death was not a tragic accident. Midland's law requires the prosecution to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed that accused crime. You must be sure without 1 ounce of doubt in your mind that Jordan Ryder killed his daughter. If your child were to go missing, would you be able to have a peaceful night of sleep? The situation at hand has become clear. Members of the jury, the prosecution asks that you find Jordan Ryder guilty of aggravated murder. Thank you.
Closing argument for the defense? And may I set up again the welfare use of the map? May I proceed? Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury may please the court. The state has brought accusations, but they don't have answers. You managed to sit in those same seats for 2 hours hearing accusation after accusation after accusation against Miss Ryder. But if you bring some accusations, you better have the answers to them. You see, this is Miss Ryder right here. She was a loving mother. She had Parker Page at the age of 17 with her loving husband, Terry. Now, unfortunately, Parker Page's husband died shortly after they had Parker, and soon after that, her parents died in a car crash. Miss Ryder was left to take care of Parker Page all by herself. She did what she could to make ends meet. She didn't make the best decisions, but we don't have to prove that she was a perfect mother. So she sold drugs online on the dark web to make some money. She had a mouth to feed, and she cared deeply about Parker. She was in prison for a few years, but after being released from prison, she tried to rekindle her relationship with Parker. Parker was a little bit different than before when Miss Ryder got in prison. You see, like Miss Ryder said, Parker would be on her phone all day. She wouldn't go outside. She just wasn't the same little girl. So to mend that relationship, Miss Ryder brought Parker Page to the Calkins campground on July 14th. They got there and headed to campsite 1 and met with the campground owner, Armani Rodriguez. They then settled into campsite 12. And shortly after, as you heard, they went around the Wagner Loop, and then they went on the Leckrone Loop. But they only made it this far on the Leckrone Loop before having to turn around and go back to camp. They made dinner back at campsite 12, but while Miss Ryder was asleep, Parker Page wandered off. Now in a panic, Miss Ryder started looking for her. She looked all around the campsites, she couldn't find her. She looked all around the Leckrone Loop, couldn't find her. She checked the Muskie Pond, the Wagner Loop, but she couldn't find her daughter. She went to the cafe that they were at earlier, but Parker was nowhere to be found. And as you heard, she spent all night awake, waiting for her daughter to return. And she fell asleep for maybe 10, 15 minutes before she was woken up by Detective Chesney and put in handcuffs. She wasn't able to help find her daughter. Now, the state has brought an accusation of aggravated murder, which means that they have to prove that Miss Ryder knowingly caused the death of Parker Page, which we can break down into 2 parts. Knowingly means that Miss Ryder was aware of her actions, and that she was aware of the potential results of her actions. You see, the state has to prove that Miss Ryder was practically certain that those actions would lead to Parker Page's death. And then there's cost, which means that Miss Ryder's actions were the direct and proximate result, the state has to prove that Parker Page's death was the direct and proximate result of Miss Ryder's actions. Meaning that if Miss Ryder didn't take those actions, then Parker would still be here today. Now, what this all boils down to is the question of whether or not Miss Ryder pushed Parker Page off of the Calkins Rock overlook. Now, after the state decided to charge Miss Ryder with aggravated murder, this left the defense with a couple of questions. You see, the state wants you to believe that with this hiking staff, Miss Ryder just pushed her daughter off the cliff. But this left us with a lot of questions, such as why would Miss Ryder do this? You haven't heard any testimony that Miss Ryder was so angry that she decided to push Parker off the cliff. Would any reasonable mother do this? Now ask yourself, if you were in Miss Ryder's situation and you were upset with your daughter, would you push her off a cliff? That's just not what people do. The state then asserts that Miss Ryder took the same hiking staff and walked it all the way down the Leghorn Loop towards Campsite 12, and then just placed that same hiking staff that she murdered her daughter with in the tent next to her. The state then wants to assert that after she murdered her daughter, she spent the same night on Campsite 12. That's just not reasonable, members of the jury. You see, because Parker was alive until about 7 to 9. You heard testimony from Dr. Lopez saying that Dr. Quincy overlooked a few factors. You see, Parker wasn't just like any other girl. She had brittle bones disease, which means that her bones and organs were weaker than the average person. Now, Dr. Lopez came before you and told you that it's entirely possible that Parker died between 7 and 9, which would match up with the defense's story that they got back to their campsite after about 4:30. Now, there's been some questions about cell phone service throughout today's trial. Now, Detective Chesney told you that they couldn't find any service around over here, or that they could find service only at the campsites, and they couldn't find service on the Leghorn Loop. Detective Chesney said that they didn't look for cell phone service on the Leghorn Loop. And when Miss Ryder took that stand, she confirmed it, that there was no cell phone service on the Leghorn Loop, just at the campsites. But looking at Exhibit 27, we know that this text was sent at 4:38. So this text message must have been sent somewhere with service, and that's not the Leghorn Loop. So if they were down at the bottom of the Leghorn Loop, that means the state would have to prove that at about 4:38, Miss Ryder and Parker made it all the way up to the Calkins Rock overlook, and then she pushed her daughter off the cliff. They would have an hour and 20 minutes to prove that Miss Ryder murdered her daughter. But this is no easy feat, as you heard. This trail is very, very difficult. It doesn't matter how difficult it was on whether Miss Ryder was guilty. The state just has to prove that they pushed Parker off the cliff. And the state failed to do that today. Now, they drew references to some statements made by Miss Ryder. But on direct examination with Detective Chesney, he didn't mention a single question that he asked Miss Ryder about this napkin. These were statements made by Miss Ryder, but she explained all the statements. She was just so angry at herself. She didn't mean to do it. She didn't mean for Parker to die that day. It doesn't necessarily mean it was her fault. She's so sorry this happened. It was all her fault. She felt guilty about bringing Parker to the Leghorn Loop and then missing. Well, Parker was missing. You see, the state chose to accuse Miss Ryder just simply because she was the easiest. Now, on cross-examination, Detective Chesney took that stand and said that they didn't ask a single question to Miss Ryder about her parole violation, which was the initial reason that they arrested Miss Ryder for. You also heard from Dr. Quincy and from Detective Chesney that Detective Chesney only provided 3 items to Dr. Quincy to come to their conclusion for the left clavicle injury. All Detective Chesney provided were items from Miss Ryder's tent. They just provided a shovel, a multi-tool, and a hiking staff. Detective Chesney made no mention that they searched the other campsites and provided any items to Dr. Quincy about that. They wanted to incriminate Miss Ryder based off of 3 pieces of evidence. You see, the state has failed to meet their burden today because they have accusations, but they don't have answers. Now, it's reasonable to be upset, especially when a little kid dies. But don't go accusing Miss Ryder because her daughter went missing. Thank you.
Yes. May I proceed? Jordan Ryder had been in prison for so long that her relationship with her daughter had blown over. This led to Jordan trying to keep the relationship alive by taking her on a camping trip to Kelkins Campground. As many witnesses today have testified, they had been arguing throughout the day in several locations. Jordan had become so infuriated that she could not save her relationship with her daughter that she pushed her own daughter off a cliff with a hiking staff. This hiking staff measures up perfectly with the bruise found on Parker Page's body. Even Dr. Lopez said that Dr. Quincy's conclusions were more likely correct than her own. Based on all this evidence, I ask that you find Jordan Ryder guilty of aggravated murder. Thank you.